Welcome back to Age of Wonders 4. Here are some key mistakes that I think you need to avoid if you want to come out on top. Let's jump straight in. First and foremost, ignoring magic materials. I think they're the least understood resource on the map, and they behave very differently to almost anything else, particularly, say, a standard gold vein. You can find them around the world, and city-states or free cities can be a good place to start. Here you can see this one spawned with Astral Dew inside of its borders. How lucky. And if I pick up a vassalage with them, I'll get it. I can also get it through quests, for example. Sometimes these quests will direct you towards sources of magic materials. You'll also, of course, pick up some handy rewards from doing it, but more importantly, it'll generally encourage you to clear out the resource. You can also find them randomly around the world, but in this case it's being guarded by a 6-strong army, and I would also note that the territory has an infestation. The two things are separate, but if I want to clear the territory and get access to the full yield, I'll need to make sure that every bad guy is gone. Take note that the red-bannered ones will attack me immediately from infestations, whereas the event-based ones won't. I'll have to trigger them first, and I might even get lucky and be able to remove them unscathed. Collecting each of the materials gives you an overall collection effect, if you can collect 3 from the category. For example, looking through liquids here, you can see that each one gives an individual effect. 20 wheelback casting points, or research spells costing 10% less. And the 3 effects inside of the groups, whether it be liquids or plants, come together and give you a collection effect if you can get 1 of each. You'll also notice there's a general theme here. So plants, for example, are focused around Imperium, around cities, and around relationships with other players. Of course, the collection effect from things like Astral Dew was focused on magic and research, and if you're after the ores, it'll be things like draft and extra experience. It's really worth exploring the map, claiming territories, and picking up these bonuses because they are strong. Moving along, we're going to talk a little bit about understanding diplomacy, because there's a lot of common mistakes that people make and they don't understand why the AI is behaving the way it is. The first thing to look at are their affinities. Each affinity has affinity that it's opposed to. Nature dislikes shadow, for example, and vice versa. Chaos dislikes order. These things matter because your affinities and their affinities may clash. And if they're clashing, that will ruin your relationship and really put a strain on diplomatic ties. To get even more detail though, and I love this bit, have a look at their personality. It'll tell you generally what they value, in this case alliances and exploration. Next, their preferences will tell you how they'll respond to you. In this case, they like alliances and getting rid of grievances, but don't like aggression. And then finally, their strategy. This is how they'll play the game. In this case, they like treaties. War must be justified, and they don't mind exploring and expanding. Understanding that gives me a huge benefit so that I can play around them. Also take note of the threat level as well, based on wars that are being fought or a need for alliances, which could boost your relationship. Speaking of relationships, this one's pretty bad. Reason being I don't really align with this character at all, and I've given them some grievances, which we'll touch on later in the video. You can see this player likes to exterminate and expand, so maybe they're going to be a little more aggressive. I'd also note that their alignment is different to mine. They are evil and I am good, which also puts further strain on our relationship. Again, we'll cover that later. As a final tidbit, you can check your progress towards all the victory conditions and also the ranking of your economy here. Likewise, you can check your enemies' rankings as well. Moving on, let's talk about hero loot and, crucially, selling remains, something I think more people should be doing more often. Of course, you can recruit heroes at any time, and the cap is the same as your city cap, if you didn't know. And you can equip them with all sorts of great loot that you might find from wonders or infestations, winning battles, and crucially, and this is the main point that I want to drive here, capturing enemy heroes and selling their remains. If you jump to the hero overview, once you've built a prison and then a crypt in your city, you'll be able to store hero remains from those who you've taken down in the battlefield, so long as they're not throne leaders. There you can sell them if you choose, or inspect the hero. This hero has some nice gear, actually a lot more gear than most of my heroes have at the moment during this campaign. So what I'll do is sell their remains for, granted, a very low price, which might not seem worthwhile at first, but getting all of these goodies and filling in blank spots where I potentially had nothing equipped before is very powerful indeed. My next category is backward diplomacy, but this time we're focusing specifically on grievances that are very misunderstood. Declarations like friendship and rivalry will not only boost empire relations, but also shift how grievances are carried out. Any grievances gained against a ruler will be reduced by 40% with friendship, and they'll be increased by 40% with rivalry. You might be asking, what do these increases mean and how do I get them? Well, you can get them by fabricating them, or you can use them to denounce an enemy. An enemy expanding towards you may trigger grievances and many other things. We'll take a look at a list in a minute. Grievances feed into war justification. In this case, you can see I have a completely unjust war. The calculation is my grievances minus theirs, and we've ended up with a negative number. That means they have a lot more grievances than I do, and declaring a war in this case would tank my Imperium down 80%. Definitely not a good idea under any circumstance. Here we take a look at the grievances in particular, and you'll note there's a little number next to them with a skull. That's the severity of the grievance, potentially being impacted by, again, those things like declarations of rivalry. Now, we trigger them by claiming, by insulting, by building outposts, all sorts of things to do with interfering with the enemy's realm. We can get rid of grievances. Their grievances, like me settling far too close to them, for example, carry a heavy penalty. I can pay for my transgression. That will remove the grievance from the opponent's side of the calculation, and as you can see, that's brought the war justification closer to the middle. Doing it one more time, I've almost balanced us out entirely, and now if I wish to declare a slightly minor bad war, I wouldn't take any Imperium penalties. Very strong. Take note also, if you forgive your transgressions or sell yours, that will remove your grievances from your side. It will all feed into the ultimate calculation. If you're wanting to declare war, you want to keep your grievances. If you're trying to push for peace and remove that justification, then you'll look to get rid of them. I hope this helps understand how war is shaped and how people behave. Now let's talk about failing to plan ahead, specifically around victory conditions and where you place your cities. Failing to plan ahead is a big no-no, obviously, in Age of Wonders 4, particularly if you're shooting for a certain victory type. Now, what I like to do with my cities is at least make sure that I have 3 roughly adjacent to each other. Then I like to head into the quests and make sure that I track the victory condition that I'm going for. I think it's particularly important with the expansion victory because you need to occupy a certain number of provinces before you can build the beacons and ascend to victory. Handy to have it up in the top left, more so perhaps than any other victory condition. Speaking of planning ahead, let's say we're planning to do an expansion victory. As I say, I want to put my cities close together and make sure I have city allies too. Their territories will count. And the other thing I want to do is make sure that my cities are actually growing stronger, faster, and better. A common mistake here is to not be building the right tile improvements at the start to get these boosted unlocks. Boosted unlocks for most of the buildings, particularly in the early game, will focus around forests, quarries, and farms. Here's an example where I don't have a quarry, yet I have 4 farms and 2 foresters, so I'm missing out on a lot of boosted buildings. The solution therefore is very simple. Attract a population, build a quarry on a free territory, and now when I jump back in, almost all of my basic buildings have been boosted because I've picked up at least one of each of those fundamental territory improvements. I'll then hurry my production along with my powerful economy and surge my knowledge well above the rest. Speaking of surging resources, death via upkeep is the enemy to surging. Here, an unjustified war is costing me all of my Imperium. A terrible shout. Mana upkeep too, from not just your units, but also unit enchantments. So take care with how many spells you're casting, and consider whether it's really worth it if you don't have the mana. And of course, gold, unit upkeep, and if you go over your hero cap. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of this video. So what did we learn today? We talked about the importance of finding magic materials and securing them as quickly as you can. Collect them all, just like Pokemon. Pick up city-states, they'll generally have them, or explore the world. While you're doing so, it's also very important to understand the enemy. I particularly like to look at their personality and their threat level. Make sure once you get rid of them, you might want to sell their remains and take their sweet, sweet loot. And of course, it's always important to plan ahead. Keep cities close together for expansion and magic victories so it's easier to defend. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. This is the end of the video. I'll be back with some more. Take care, and I'll see you next time.